Hello and welcome to India's World. India last week boycotted the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation hosted by China. The opening ceremony of the forum was attended by heads of 29 states, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, and Sri Lanka's PM Ranil Wickremesinghe. Delegations from over 100 countries were present at the forum. The Belt and Road Initiative, also known as One Belt, One Road or OBOR, is one of President Xi Jinping's most ambitious policy moves. It aims to strengthen Beijing's economic and political leadership through an elaborate program of infrastructure building throughout China's neighborhood. China has promised to fork out $124 billion for OBOR. This money will go to projects in different countries along the corridor as Chinese loans and is in turn expected to boost their trade and employment. India boycotted the OBOR conference, citing concerns over the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor or CPEC as it impacts on India's sovereignty. The CPEC is an integral part of OBOR. However, CPEC is not the only component of OBOR that India is worried about. The Indian government views China's initiative largely through a geopolitical lens, seeing it as Beijing's attempt to gain political leverage over its neighbors. To discuss whether India's caution is well-founded and the manner in which OBOR may change the geopolitical landscape of this region, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador M.K. Bhadrakumar. A votary of OBOR, he was India's ambassador to Uzbekistan and to Turkey. He is one of our most prominent strategic thinkers and commentators, and he writes the widely read foreign policy blog, Indian Punchline. We have with us Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan, a former High Commissioner of India to Pakistan. He also has served as High Commissioner to Singapore. We have Dr. Jebin Jacob, an expert on China and East Asia. He is a fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. I welcome you gentlemen to this discussion. Dr. Jacob, let me begin with you. Let's talk about the various dimensions of OBOR, taking the economic dimension first. Would it be correct to say that while OBOR is more than an economic initiative, at its core is an economic project to enable China to export its surplus productive capacity? And if this overcapacity is not addressed, the Chinese economy would continue cooling down and increase inequalities within China.
The primary objective of the One Belt, One Road is certainly China's domestic situation. As you mentioned, this is about exporting Chinese overcapacity, and that includes obsolete technology. China wants to upgrade its own economy and manufacturing sector to the next level, and so a lot of polluting old industries are being exported to China's neighbors. And the logic is that, well, those neighbors are at a level where they can use this technology, where they would not be able to absorb higher quality or higher technology. Most of this export is taking place in the infrastructure sector, which is where China has seen overheating. Chinese economy has seen overheating, and most of the infrastructure is obviously well and much required in the rest of Asia. So the economics of it is certainly a big part of it. Yeah. But there is also the other aspect in which China is trying to ensure that its state-owned enterprises, its big companies, become regional and global players. So this is also kind of an experimentation or going out strategy, as they call it, for Chinese companies, and familiarize themselves with China's neighborhood to replace, if necessary, if possible, other players.
Okay. Ambassador Raghavan, doesn't OBOR also serve Beijing's primary foreign policy goal of attaining strategic parity with the United States in Asia and trying to shape the region in such a way that it ensures that China's rise is unrestrained?
Well, certainly there is a larger strategic element in a economic program of such a large dimension, and that there is the predominant view in the Chinese strategic mindset that with the rise of China as a global economic power, political configurations need to change also correspondingly. But if I may just comment on the overall project, because there is this view that, you know, such a large investment of capital in different countries on the infrastructure sector is something which will transform these countries very radically. My note of caution is not just with regard to Pakistan, but in general, that whenever we look at the experience of foreign capital going into other economies, other environments, other markets, the experience has not really been a very positive
we are going to discuss that. Ambassador Bhadrakumar, Is OBOR also a possible solution to the Chinese fear, or what the Chinese call the Malacca dilemma, that its existing trade routes, especially through the Straits of Malacca, would be cut off in the event of confrontation with the United States, if such a confrontation takes place in the future, given that it is surrounded by US allies. So, is this an attempt to thwart that possibility?
See, there is a dialectic playing here in the sense that historically speaking, President Xi Jinping put forward this idea of the One Belt, One Road against the backdrop of the US's pivot strategy in Asia. So naturally, people correlated that. Malacca dilemma is something which has been mentioned also. I mean, the expression itself was attributed, I think, largely to the former Chinese president.
Absolutely.
There is a choke point there in so far as the United States controls the straits. And obviously, from the geography, we can make out that this is an artery which is coming through Pakistan or through Central Asia, which is terrain, which is territory, which is completely outside the orbit of American influence. That is there. Now, but having said that, when I said dialectic, there is also the other side of it. As it developed, as the idea developed, I find that China is now more interested in projecting this as its contribution to the globalization process, the rekindling of the globalization process. And it pays dividends politically, because this is also happening at a time when the United States' retrenchment in the Trump era is taking place. Now, Davos, for instance, when President Xi Jinping went, his speech itself, the British newspapers wrote that he spoke as if he was the only adult in Davos at that time. So this is a kind of projection. So now what do you find? You find China encouraging Western powers, in fact, to come into Asian investment infrastructure investment bank, and a number of them now, I think over 70 countries have come in, and most of the Western players, big players, have come into it. And OBOR also, the conference which took place in Beijing, for example, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, German Finance Minister, even the Americans deputed. Now, the most interesting part is the last one, which is that the Americans, the Chinese are now bending over backwards to see that the Americans come on board. So, when we say that this is against Malacca Straits, I think, we are putting behind that paradigm.
No, I said also.
Also, it is, yeah, it is. So, I said there is a dialectic. Both are, one is playing against the other. Now, the Chinese interest lies in fact, in getting the Americans on board the OBOR.
Okay, all right. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing China's One Belt, One Road project and its impact on the region, possible impact on the region. Dr. Jacob, do you think many of the Chinese projects which are being incorporated into OBOR, because a lot of them are pre-OBOR, can potentially serve dual economic and strategic purposes, such as the port in Gwadar in Pakistan, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, and in Djibouti? Now, might not this be true of other future projects that will come up under OBOR?
See, I think this dual use nature is true of almost any project by any country. The question is really, the pacing of it, and the overall language, the overall environment around these projects. And the problem with the Chinese projects is essentially the lack of transparency. There is a lack of transparency or details even OBOR project countries are raising. To take even the case of Pakistan, even within Pakistan, if you look at it, there are all sorts of questions being raised about, okay, what is the price of power, what is the rate of interest, are locals going to be employed? All of these big issues are being asked even within a so-called ally of China's. So I think that's where the catch is. Yeah. If you do not have transparency, then people are going to come up with questions. Okay,
Ambassador Raghavan, since most of the investment will come from Chinese banks, do you think these banks might face some problems if the OBOR countries defaulted on their loans? One, and two, we've seen in Sri Lanka that when you take far too much of Chinese debt, you get into a debt trap. And at that point, countries might have to cede control over national resources or national projects to the Chinese?
Well, certainly there is always the risk that in large infrastructure projects, banks may end up overextending themselves, rate of returns not materializing. But given the fact that this is overwhelmingly not so much a strategic project, but a strategic priority of the government of China, I don't think those factors will come into play very.
The first one won't come into play, but what about the second one?
The second one, I would say, I think the experience will vary from country to country. In Sri Lanka, we saw one set of reactions to large Chinese investments. But I think in Pakistan, the consensus with regard to Chinese investments is very strong. Regardless of the questions and the voices which are being raised, the fact is that the domestic political consensus on relations with China is exemplified by the fact that all the chief ministers, and they belong to different parties, accompanied Nawaz Sharif for the OBOR forum. So I don't think that these technical issues about rate of return and so on, there may be concerns, but they are not going to be a material factor in the foreseeable future at least.
Okay. Ambassador Bhadra Kumar, do you think India was right in not participating in the Belt and Road Forum, and why is India opposed to OBOR?
Bharat, if I may introduce a controversial thought into this, I see it in two ways. One is on the diplomatic plane, how we are trying to explain this. I think my own assessment, there is a lot of dissimulation taking place there. And then secondly, on the other part, you can look into what could be the real compulsions.
Tell us quickly.
And now, some of this on the first side have been mentioned by Mr. Jacob, that that China might dump excess capacity, and lack of transparency about the financial underpinnings and so on. Now, these are things which can be taken care of. In the sense that China is not shoving money down the throat of any country. Now, let's look at it like this. India is attracting a lot of foreign investment, but that's not the case with a number of these other countries, whether it's Cambodia or Sri Lanka or Myanmar. They need money. So, they are actually, Nepal, for example, the railway project. Who's going to build it otherwise? They need this money. $8 billion is a big money for their economy. So, it is actually irrelevant. There's no point in our fretting and fuming about it. If the offer is made to us, we are a sovereign country, we are quite capable of resisting this kind of.
But we have refused to join OBOR. I'm saying, what are the reasons?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The reasons are, firstly, we are saying about these aspects which have been mentioned here. I think there is a sense of, it's a bit surreal in the sense that, that they are really not, after all, we are quite capable of determining what should be the financial underpinning, interest rate and so on. I think if you come into the real part of it, there are three templates there. One is, I think in terms of the fact that China is definitely through this BRI is expanding its global influence. Okay. Now, this is a very disconcerting thought for India. Okay. Secondly, in the recent years, at least, I think the approach towards China has been mostly by bandwagoning with the Americans' pivot strategy. Now that strategy has changed. So India is in a twilight zone with regard to China. That is a second factor. And the third one is, I think this building of Pakistan is making us uneasy. Okay. I think these are the real factors which are coming into play.
Okay, Dr. Jacob, in what way does India stand to lose out, if it or does it not stand to lose out by not joining OBOR? Is India desperate for Chinese investment in ports and roads and infrastructure?
No, I don't think anybody is desperate in that sense. The important point is that at this particular stage, India needed to make a statement, and it did make a very important statement as regards all the shortcomings of the Belt and Road initiative. And that was done. It's 3 years into the project, many things are not clear, and that statement India did make. Now, the real question is what now? Because the Chinese are going to go ahead with it anyway. And it's actually a mistake to consider this a multilateral project, and I think that was also underlined by India. This is essentially a series of bilateral projects. Now, the thing with India's participation is that India, just by participating doesn't mean that you actually agree to any of this, right? So, actually India could have actually made a statement in that particular forum, and it could have also been a sort of a support system for smaller countries which have concerns about the Belt and Road, but as has been mentioned, are not in a position to refuse such largesse.
Okay.
So I think that's where India now really needs to follow up on the MEA statement of May 13th.
Yeah.
Okay, that these are the issues. Whether India is now going to be explaining to the rest of the world, to those countries who are going to be involved in BRI, that these are the issues going forward that you need to take care of.
Okay, Ambassador Raghavan, do you think the critics of the government are right in saying that India has actually painted itself into a corner on the Belt and Road Initiative because of sovereignty related issues in CPEC? That was the emphasis of the Foreign Office statement, that where issues of sovereignty are involved, a nation has to take a strong position. And why can't India, as some people argue, keep these political issues, bilateral issues separate from commercial ones?
To my mind, while the sovereignty issues regarding the route of the CPEC played a role, but we also have to see Chinese behavior, and especially behavior on sensitive issues concerning India, where there was almost a gratuitous effort to give offense. And people often cite the NSG admission question, but more significant to my mind was the veto with regard to the Masood Azhar listing by the UN committee concerned. I think that showed a certain insensitivity which had to be responded to.
Okay.
And on issues concerning terrorism, and this is not just true of India, but perhaps of most countries in the world, you cannot segregate the economics from the political that easily.
Okay, all right. We need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing the possible regional consequences of the One Belt, One Road initiative by China. Master Bhadra Kumar, do you agree with the perception in India that OBOR up to now has been a unilateral initiative, as Jevin Jacob also pointed out, that what is needed is a more cooperative approach? China just announced OBOR. It just announced CPEC. It did not consult India or did not follow a cooperative approach. That unless you have a cooperative approach, you cannot foster an environment of trust and confidence. I am quoting the Foreign Minister of India at the Raisina dialogue. Do you think that China has failed to sort of meet the prerequisite for interconnected world, although it couches OBOR in those terms?
You see, let me approach it from another side, that what is the optimal way of countering a situation like this, which is causing uneasiness in our mind, and we are unable to stop the process, and how do you do it? I think in the contemporary world situation, the important thing is engagement, networking. And therefore, it is always better to be inside the tent rather than outside looking in.
This is the point Jevin also made.
Looking in and finding fault with it. This is what Russia has done. Russia has not gained anything out of this. Russia has deep misgivings about this, about what China is probably likely to do in Central Asia and in the Russian hinterland. So, but at the same time, they are in it. I think these misgivings which have been articulated here have been expressed even at the BRI event in Beijing. It is finding reflected in the joint communique under the subheading guiding principles. Now, the Chinese, I think what I see is now is that this is going to be transforming now as a supply chain. And the Chinese are getting the point that, that this is otherwise being seen, as we are saying, as a bilateral show in terms of as an Exim Bank kind of effort, export promotion. Yeah. So if it is a supply chain, for example, I think the Western powers are in it, the Western think tanks are writing quite a lot about this, and they are looking at it like this. For instance, financial, Western banking system can come into this. As you see, the flagship project in Colombo already, Colombo City project already, the Chinese have accepted an American architecture firm to plan it and supervise it. So the point is, this kind of supply chains are not happening very often in the world economy today. So any supply chain coming, sophisticated partners like the Western partners, they see immense potential. We are looking at it simply, the OBOR, simply as a matter of building highways and roads and ports. But that's not what it will be when it becomes a supply chain.
That's a good point. Ambassador Raghavan, do you think if India joined OBOR and became a full-fledged partner and had participated in the forum in Beijing, etc., China would reverse its policies on India's membership of NSG, or would it have not vetoed or would not veto in future the blacklisting of Masood Azhar, or that it would not make provocative statements about Tawang, and it would not it would stop renaming places in Arunachal by giving them Tibetan names?
Well, to my mind, the Chinese have decided on a certain course of action with each of these specific points, and what you did with Obor would not make a difference. So, getting inside the tent only for the sake of being in the tent and influencing events marginally, to my view, did not make much sense, because you did need to make a strong statement and certainly send a strong message to the Chinese that it cannot be a one-way street. In any case, with regard to
my point is, it would not be a reciprocal street either. That it will not be a two-way street. Even if you joined Obor, they were not going to change their policies towards India.
Absolutely. And in any case, the position of India in this large project is different from the other countries concerned, because your size makes you have a different perspective on things. And this, in fact, really takes you to a heart of foreign policy issues in India, not now, but from the 50s onwards, that your size and your interests make you have a certain, give you a certain contrarian perspective on developments which are otherwise very appealing to smaller neighbors at different stages of development.
Jaymin, Chinese diplomats have warned that India will pay a price for not participating in Obor in Delhi. Now, what is the price that India will have to pay?
Well, first of all, I think the assumptions that the Chinese diplomats work under are completely mistaken. What price do you think India can play? I mean, India is a big country, India is a big player, India is right at the heart of this One Belt One Road project. Whether it's a land route, the Silk Road.
Why make such statements? Why threaten India by saying that?
I think Chinese diplomats are not only playing, trying to send a message to India, they are also having to send a message back home to Beijing. So, it's their job to do it. So, I don't think a serious Chinese diplomat would actually believe in this particular statement. It's just not done between big countries, and China, which is so sensitive about sovereignty issues, certainly understands that there is an element of hypocrisy, a certain element of double standards in its own position vis-a-vis India's participation in One Belt One Road.
Okay.
The real question for India going forward is not that, what is One Belt One Road? There is no such organization. It's all driven from Beijing. So, I think the issue is for India to cherry pick what is useful from this entire thing, but it need not necessarily call it One Belt One Road.
Last question. We are running out of time. So, Master Bhadra Kumar, what could be India's answer to Obor? Because people have said we should pursue our own connectivity projects with the help of countries that are apprehensive of Chinese hegemony in this region, that we have BBIN, BIMSTEC forum, we can do connectivity through them. Then this India-Japan effort to promote Asia-Africa growth corridor has been talked about. US help in their old project which has been revived, the new Silk Road project, and the Indo-Pacific Economic Corridor linking India with Southeast Asia, that we should do all this. But my experience of looking at these things is we only talk about it. We've been talking about Act East. Your connectivity even from Moreh to Mandalay is worse than Mandalay to Roili going to China.
Bharat, I think, first of all, it's not feasible in the sense that in terms of the surplus capital and the resources needed for it, I don't think we are in a position to do that. Second, certainly there is the efficiency factor. The third, the more dangerous thing is that, I think we will be drawing comparison with the Chinese, and I think we will look very shoddy there. You see the point, that a project execution in a certain time, I don't think, our track record shows that, we are never able to do that. Chabahar, I wrote this morning about it, in fact, about in the context of Rouhani's victory in Iran, Ufa summit time, Prime Minister and Rouhani, what all big ideas they discussed. And I was reading an interview in the Iranian press, nothing has happened in Chabahar. So, even when it concerns, core interests and the strategic plane, we are shoddy performers. So, I don't think that is in the consideration zone at all as a viable thing to do.
Okay. That really brings us to the end of today's discussion. I would like to thank all my guests, Dr. Javin Jacob, Ambassador T.C. Raghavan, Ambassador M.K. Bhadrakumar. Thank you for participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. Goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.